is my domain. We are the
Welcome, welcome, welcome. Now we're talking about middle-aged Ermor. Finally, we're being able to get in touch with our undead roots. And we're going to go and discuss this horribly destroyed nation, both in the game lore and also with Illwinter's massive nerfs. Many don't seem to realize, I've discussed on the forums with people, they don't really realize how horribly crippled Ermor was in Dominion 6. It seems like they really don't want Ermor to be viable at all. So we're going to briefly discuss my thoughts and my love of Ermor, because I love him regardless. But I'm going to have a quick discussion about the changes from Dominions 5 to 6, just for the veterans who are really quickly only looking for that. Somebody just kind of talk about it, because I know for vets, sometimes they just like to skim through the video. Well, I'll put it right at the very front. So let's look at what we're looking at right here. So we're looking at basic undead, do not need supplies, can underwater, unbreakable, walk day and night, recruit, summons, reanimates undead with their dominion. That's typical, that's standard. Military is the same, magic is basically the same. Priests are powerful, can reanimate the dead, basically the same. Dominion reanimates the dead, kills population, senses corpses. One difference here is it doesn't kill population to 0, it kills it down to 10. That might have to do with the fact that defense is a minimum of 1 for a province now, but when you kill even your capital, it won't go to 0 pop, it'll go to 10. And so it can eventually rebuild for somebody else. I don't know if that was intentional or if that was just tied into the defense of 1, but that's a kind of nerf for us, not one of the biggest ones. But death limit of +2, that would be a buff if we didn't start at death 3, right? So we start at death 3, so we can only get 1 point from death by going to death 4. And the bad part about that is there's another nerf tied into this that you may not realize, but if you actually do go to death 4, now your dominion, when it gets death 4 in a province, will convert that province into a wasteland. Because death now does that. Just like growth 4 converts provinces into forests, it'll take, a farmland and convert it to a forest. I think it goes plains then forest or something like that. But in terms of death, it will take a farmland, turn it to a plains, and then turn it to a wasteland. So you'll get even less income even faster. And you'll see in our testing a little bit later that this is actually a fairly powerful determining factor for your income. Misfortune limit of +1 also sucks for us because it limits our top end. Everybody that plays Ermor wants to go luck so you can get gold events and gem events. Well, now you're limited to 1 unless you pick the only pretender chassis. There's only one pretender chassis who is only an astral caster in order to raise your limit back up to the normal 2. So you're already nerfed twice here. Standard forts, yeah, except fort costs went up this game edition. So since fort costs and temple costs went up, we got nerfed again. Since our money didn't get a boost to match that. Temples produce death gems, yeah, but only up to your dominion per temple. So if you have a dominion of 5 and you build up to 5 temples, you'll get up to 5 gems, right? 1 per temple. But once you build a 6th, well, that's a bad number. So let's say 4. If you build 4 temples, you'll get 4 gems, but if you build a 5th, you'll get a 5th gem because it'll upgrade to Dominion 5. So you'll be able to get that 5th gem, but then if you build a 6th temple, you won't get a 6th death gem until you raise your Dominion score to 6. So that's the major determining factor for why you wouldn't just go Dominion 3 every game, because you're crippling your death income, which sucks because that's another place you have to spend points. Points that, let me remind you, are dramatically reduced by the fact that you can't tank scales to 3 anymore, which was another nerf for us. Now that you can't go -3 order, -3 productivity, -3 cold, that's 3 scales you just lost the points of. That's 120 points you lost right there, right? Then we start at death 3, so we're already missing those points, but we can go to death 4, so now we get possibly 1 scale back, but with the downside of crippling all the income of all of our own provinces into wastelands on top of our crippled income. Now our luck is limited by 1, so now we have lower luck, so less gem income and gold income that way, which, there's math that's been done on Dom 5 about the math of actual luck. It actually does reduce it, and now our magic can only go up to +2. So there's a lot of indirect nerfs going on so far. But something else to consider is everybody else gets an increase in national money. you're not benefiting from that at all. So everybody else is getting more elite units and more elite legions to fight us. So we're going to get smoked even easier because our skeletons aren't going to hold up. And something that they didn't really, I don't think they pointed out very obviously, they did little tiny nerfs on Ermor's units. Like they lowered the strength of the Velite by 1 from 11 to 10. That's just an unnecessary -1 damage to the Velite. I don't know why. There was no explanation, nothing that I saw, but now Velites have 1 less strength. So there you go. We're even worse and we're against even better troops. So mages got more expensive for other nations, which is good for us because we don't pay for our mages, but our mages are still, you know, Ermor, ever since Lucid made his video on Dom 5 a long time ago, Ermor's been known as the worst research nation because you have to summon your mages and they're expensive as hell. Now we're still the worst research game, or the worst nation for research, but everybody else has to pay slightly more for their mages, but they get way more income for those mages, so it's pretty bad. We lost Wailing Winds, the spell. In Dom 5, that was a huge late game strategy for us because it was Death and Air, I believe, and now it's Glamour, which we don't have any access to whatsoever. So we lost Wailing Winds for that huge fear play where you're constantly dropping fear on the entire battlefield. This is one problem I have with other YouTubers making videos about Ermor, is I've seen this for a couple of years now, is people keep saying Ermor has free spawn lictors. That is not true. Ermor does not have free spawn lictors. Please stop saying that. Ermor has lictors that you can summon with your priests, you can reanimate, or you can summon with your spell, which we'll talk about later when we're talking about magic, especially with the Black Laurel. It's a great summon, but they do not have free spawn lictors. They have free spawn sensors, which are commanders, which are not the same thing. Keep that in mind, because I see people developing strategies for boatloads of lictors, and then they don't put into place the things you need to put into place to get a boatload of lictors. It's a good strategy to hell bless lictors and run around with them, but you have to remember, they don't just show up. You have to actually produce them, which costs you mage turns or priest turns, and that gets more expensive than you think. So I'm just here to let everybody know, lictors do not free spawn, so don't count on it. Now, Rigor Mortis, there was a change to Rigor Mortis. Well, there's now a difficult MR check people can make to just resist it. That's a huge nerf. Foul Vapors went from 200% casting time to 225% casting time, taking us longer to cast it. 100 up to a 200 fatigue cost. So it doubled in fatigue cost. 1 nature gem went up to 2, and now it went from 3 nature to 4 nature just to cast. And it creates clouds instead of direct 5 armor negating damage to random troops. So, and it went from enchantment level 5 to 6, more huge nerfs. So Foul Vapors is something that if you can find a way to cast it, you know, with an indie mage, it's now even more difficult to cast. You can no longer twice born your pretender, so you can't pick a living pretender, twice born them, and then get them back. No, you're just going to be getting diseased and getting slammed by everything you do globally to try to hurt everybody else. Fire Shield is a nerf that I don't see many people talking about. This is kind of a hardly known nerf, but Fire Shield in Dominions 5 required somebody to hit you for them to take the fire damage. It doesn't anymore. Now Fire Shield hits enemies that even miss, and yes, I've tested this numerous times. If your long deads go up against a thug with a Fire Shield and they all miss him, they will all light themselves on fire still. That's a giant nerf to our long dead. So, and keep in mind, one buff we got is Wither Bones and Dust to Dust being the lower level, Wither Bones being the higher level, now has an MR check for half damage, but our problem is our magic resistance of our basic troops to begin with. So our magic resist checks aren't great to begin with, even with our buffs. So we are still going to get crushed by Wither Bones and Dust to Dust, because even with MR check for half damage is still a boatload of damage. I think it's 8 damage in a giant AoE. It's still gonna crush us. So we got a little tiny buff there, and that was virtually it. I mean, a couple other spells and a couple other things have a little buff here, a little buff there, a little nerf here, a little nerf there. But we are way weaker in this edition. We are way worse off. There are so many things that we're worse off on, it's very difficult to even talk about. Now that we've briefly gone over that, let's discuss free spawn and exactly what we can do to manipulate it. All right, now I'm going to talk about free spawning. Free spawning is very, very, very important to Ermor. Obviously, that's how we produce our armies and produce our troops. I was going to discuss test results on free spawning here, but instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some basic rules to follow, and then I'm going to give a link to an unlisted video down below in the description to let you see all of my tests if you care about the mechanics behind it. Basically, the number one way to determine how many troops you're getting are temples. That's it. If you build a temple, you will like quintuple, if not more, lower your amount of free spawn production. Doesn't matter if it's in a fort or not. When you build a fort, the level of fort matters to the quality of the troop. If you build a fort, you will start getting way better troops. And if you build a higher level fort, you will start getting even better troops than that. But the number one thing is a temple. Labs don't seem to make any difference whatsoever. They might, I don't know, but I have tested pretty extensively and they don't seem to. So I wouldn't crank labs everywhere. I would focus on getting temples everywhere and then trying to get castles on top of them. Any kind of fort to protect them, and then build those forts up if you can, because they start to raise the amount of Knights of the Unholy Sepulchre that you get. That being said, if you aren't focusing a strong bless around the Knights or around lictors, then you really don't need to worry about building up huge forts, because if you're not summoning a whole boatload of lictors, or if you don't need a huge massive hell bless for your Knights, which, spoiler alert, is way harder to make in this edition of Dominion since we got nerfed so horribly during Pretender creation, you might not even really care about leveling up your forts. You might just want basic forts sitting there, because I mean it really makes a very small difference, but you'll see that on the other video. Next, we're going to kind of analyze our troops, our basic troops, our mages and commanders in a little bit more detail, just so you know when and where to deploy each one. Alright, now we're going to start our discussion about troops, troop strengths, how to use the troops, where to deploy them, what to do, etc., how to get them. So I'm going to start in the top left with what I think is the most powerful and useful troop, most versatile. The Knight of the Holy Sepulchre only has 6 hit points, 17 protection is really good for them. 16 defense is also solid, like a typical knight. Great morale, obviously, because he's long dead. He's basically dumb and just standing in there. But that being said, mindless troops have their purpose because they can still follow orders, and he's on a sacred skeletal horse, which is right here. The horse is a bit of a weakness in this one. Defense skill of only 8 and 11 HP. The HP of 11 is good because it boosts our overall HP of the square to 17, and I think we had lower HP for the square before than, I think it was 5 hit points instead of 6 for these knights in Dom 5. But getting this big dummy with only a magic resist of 10 makes it so we're more vulnerable to banishment because they can knock our horse out from underneath us. And it's more HP per square, so it's kind of like we're going to be taking more banishment just right off the bat. That being said, they're knights. They're knights that you can bless with your sacred bless. So you know what to do with these guys. Charge the back line, knock people out, light them up. Don't be holding the front lines with these guys unless you do some ridiculous defensive bless, which doesn't make any sense. Use the extra hit points of the horse to abuse it and beat people down. Try to hit them hard. And whatever blessing you design for your lictors is going to do great on your knights. And the way you get more knights is by building basically a castle to get the knights, and then you build a temple to get even more. Remember, if we don't build a castle, we don't get any knights, but if we don't build a temple, we hardly get any of them. So if you build a temple, it greatly increases the volume of troops. It does not increase the percentage of knights that you get, but it increases the volume to the point where you'll get way more knights overall, which is the whole goal. So temple, then castle. Now, when you're looking over here at Long Dead Horsemen, same purpose as the Knights of the Unholy Sepulchre. Everything I said for them, use for them. Just understand they're not nearly as capable. They only have a light lance, so they're not doing nearly as much. Even if you're able to cast Strength of Giants on them, they're not going to get as much of a benefit as the Knight of the Unholy Sepulchre. They hit like trucks. They do not. They're just fast and get on top of mages. And frankly, you don't have to kill the mages. If you get on top of them, you're able to slow them down just as much. And their skeletal horse isn't much better. So you're able to get on top of people and just cause problems for them back there. That's what these guys are for. Now, lictors hit like trucks. They do 29 damage with their two-handed axe. They're fairly protected, but remember, no helmet on these guys. So these big dorks, they're not that tough. They're not that tanky. But what you can do is you can use them just like you would a knight, only more of a front line. The problem with lictors, so this is one big issue that I had with Ermor in Dominions 5, but I also have with Ermor in Dominion 6, is that lictors are seemingly tough. You look at a cold aura 3, which is great, higher cold resistance of 25, protection of 16, magic resist 14, morale 18, 20 hit points, seems good, right? But then you take away the hat, and now you've just made these guys vulnerable to archery and anything coming from the sky, like, I don't know, something people cast all the time against Ermor, like Rain of Stones. So these guys can get clobber knocked just by Rain of Stones, just like every other troop that you're already going to be getting hit by. So when someone brings a counter against you, like Rain of Stones, you're already going to be suffering with all your other troops, and now your lictors are vulnerable to it as well. It's a huge weakness that you really can't circumvent unless you take some air shield bless or something ridiculous. So you have to understand they are squishy. So when you're sitting there going, oh, my level 3 priest can waste his turn every turn pumping out one of these, just understand if he does that 30 turns in a row and then someone casts, you know, Dust to Dust on him, or casts, you know, Wither Bones on a big chunk of these guys and kills 10 or 11 of them at a time, it's not going to feel real strong when it took you that long to get them. What you're really trying to do with your Bless is trying to have them serve a particular purpose, some kind of damage purpose for my personal preference. But you can also make them a little tanky, a little resistant to stuff, but it feels kind of silly to make them resistant to stuff since they're not resistant to the basic things like crossbowmen, archers. Basic archers will annihilate these guys because their combat speed's only 8. They're slower than dirt like all of Ermor. So archers, especially if somebody's throwing flaming arrows on them, is going to destroy them. So something to consider. They're not as tanky as they look. Now, the knights are. They have a full helmet, they have a kite shield, armor, good lance, good broadsword. That's why I designed my whole Bless for these goofballs rather than these guys. Even though they have a lower magic resist, I'd rather deal with that than have to deal with all these little holes that pop up for these slow guys. And frankly, you have a lot of slow troops. If you really need somebody to just bog the enemy up, I mean, you have tons of Long Dead for that. So we already went over horsemen. Long Dead, Triarius, they have the highest protection you're going to have. They have a long spear, which gives them a little more repelling. They're not great, but they're tough and tanky and they hold the front lines. They bog people down. That's the whole purpose of these guys, bogging people down. Put them up front so they absorb damage and let them stay there. Principe, they have a javelin. They have 12 protection. They're good secondary liners behind the Triarius because they will throw their javelins and then they will hold the line with Triarius, filling in when these guys fall. Velites are the same and Legionnaires are the same, but Legionnaires have 10 protection, basically otherwise the same. So you put these guys and Legionnaires, I'd put them even in the same group and just have them chuck javelins because then these guys would get there a little slower and chuck javelins right after, but then you have a line of javelins behind your Triarius throwing javelins and then joining the melee. And then Velites, same thing, except 0 protection, so you want them kind of attacking when they're not getting attacked back, so when everyone's fatigued already, so it's good to have them in a third line behind all of them. Then your basic Long Dead, there are some with a shield and some armor and helmets, and there are some with absolutely nothing. Just a spear. All variations in between. I'm not going to go over each variation. These guys are basically just bodies. Just bodies. Bodies! They have decent siege strength, but they don't have good siege defense, so just bodies. Ghouls have intelligence. They're mindful as opposed to mindless, or I guess brainiacs we'll call them. These brainiacs right here, because I find that hilariously ironic, these brainiacs will hold up your forts better than anybody else, and they're still undead, so they don't need to eat. They also gain bonus HP per corpse, but because they have a 0 protection, just don't worry about that. The poison claw is nice. You can paralyze if they can hit high protection thug or something. They might be able to paralyze them, but it's something that I wouldn't depend on. I would just use them to hold up forts. Soulless, I mean, you can use them to hold up forts too, even though they have the mindlessness and they're 0.1, I think, siege defense, because you get so darn many of them. You can just sit there and hold up the walls regardless, because even if you get 100 of these guys, you only get 10 siege defense, but that's 10, and you're not going to get 100 of these guys. You're going to get 10,000 of these guys. So something to consider, just using it to supplement here and there. Otherwise, with a magic resist of only 5, and even their 15 hit points are garbage because of 0 protection, magic resist 5, you're toast. These guys are just evocation bait. That's all they are. That's really all they are. And the problem is with your troops that think like your ghouls, your soulless dying in this much HP with 0 protection of 5 magic resist, getting annihilated is hundreds and hundreds and eventually thousands of hit points that are just vanishing on your battlefield, so they're going to cause morale checks for everybody else. Quite difficult to use them. But you will have a ton of them. Feel free to chuck them at problems, but don't expect them to solve the problems. They will just delay the problems until your knights get in there or your lictors. That's kind of, your knights are like your specific answer troops. So you really need to orient your bless around your knights and absolutely just dominating people with them. Remember this though, mindless troops can still run guard commander commands, so don't bother wasting your mindful troops on that. When you're summoning your lictors, don't forget, if you build a black laurel, they become the most efficient way to summon them. Otherwise, if you need a whole ton of them and you don't want to waste mage turns, which is my recommendation, I believe the spell is called Lictorian Legion. That will get you a whole bunch of lictors in a short period of time. And if you cast Lictorian Legion, it gets you an instant 32.5 siege defense if you see a huge enemy army coming in. So if you cast that 3 times, you just gave yourself 100 siege defense that doesn't need to eat and sits inside and relaxes. So pretty good way to use your gems all of a sudden if you're getting rushed, and you will be getting rushed. So be aware and be prepared for that. Now let's go over some of the commanders you have. And now to discuss commanders and heroes. We've got your censors, which are the most common commanders that will be showing up. They're basically a leading lictor. They hit like trucks. They do 30 damage. They're good anti-thugs or anti-super combatant uses if you want. I'd rather use a batch of lictors if possible, but sometimes you just need a magic weapon, right? And these guys are easier to put magic weapons on than lictors. You just put a magic weapon on this guy and chop chop, there goes the SC or the thug. They have great strength, so levying a two-handed weapon on them to hit like a truck is good. They still have the same penalties, no helmet, nothing good in that regard. So don't treat them like anything other than a troop leader. Do not have them ferry around your troops that are brainiacs. They have minds, because a leadership of 10 means -1 to the morale, and Dominions is a game of -1s and +1s. This is another -1 against you for your lictors. Ironically, the censor isn't a good leader for lictors, but he's also not a good leader for ghouls and similar troops that think. You have a hero, Character, the arch censor. He's a censor with higher damage and a little bit of fear. That's pretty much it. I mean, he's tough. He's tough as nails. He's strong, but he still doesn't have a helmet, and he's not that tough. So just treat him the same way. The thing is, he has good leadership, so he won't get a -1. He'll get just a +0. So use him like that. He'll show up, and he's, useful. Alcastos, although not technically a lictor, he's a priest king. He's a level 3 priest. He's a really unique guy in the way that his HP is so darn low, but his magic path is so darn high. Generally speaking, what I do with this goofball is I keep him home until I can protect him, and then I kind of just use him like I would any other like archbishop. Now that we're speaking about these guys, let's get into the different levels of priests you can summon. You can summon an acolyte, which are level 1 priests. They don't really summon very well. They're expensive. It costs you 10 death gems to summon one of them for a level 1 priest. The spells they can cast in combat are all AoE 1, so if you're forced to use them, they're horrible. Just have them unholy command enemy priests, because the target of unholy command is just 1 unit, so these guys aren't as punished. So if you get stuck with any of these acolytes, cast unholy command on enemy priests and try and get them, because if you're within 10 squares of an enemy priest, hey, might as well. And then if you get them, good luck. If you lose this guy, who cares? They might get lucky, but you don't really need them. They only reanimate 6+ ghouls, 8+ soulless, and 3+ long dead. For 10 death gems, that's too much. Don't get these guys if you can help it. I mean, people say, oh, you might want to use one of them to build a temple. Let's be real. In a real game, you're not building 15 temples a turn. If you have an extra acolyte, sure, use them to build a temple, but don't act like you don't have enough archbishops and bishops around to build temples as well. Now let's look at the bishop. The bishop costs us 16 gems to summon, which is quite a bit less than the 23 for the archbishop, but he's only a level 2. So again, the AoE of most of his spells goes up from AoE 1 to like AoE 5, maybe 10, depending on the spell for buff spells. So he's better at it, but he's not great. Why would you bother with this guy? The summons could possibly be it, because you get 7+ ghouls, 16+ soulless, and 5+ long dead, as well as 1+ horsemen, but you still can't summon lictors. So you're getting AoE 10 buffs for undead. So he's not the best, but he's also not the worst. The battlefield wide stuff comes from the archbishop, or Alcastos from earlier. They start with a Rod of Death as opposed to these guys' Poison Claws, which is phenomenal because it lets you take over undead in the battlefield. I don't know how to script them to do this. You can't pull it up in the army setup screen, but I think they'll do it if they go off of script towards the end maybe, and you're facing a bunch of undead. These guys have terrible protection, of course, like all your priests, but what they can summon when they're reanimating is 8+ ghouls, 24+ soulless, 7+ long dead, 2+ horsemen, and 1 lictor per turn. And if you keep going up in levels, like if you get this guy up to a level 4, he summons 2 lictors per turn. Level 5 summons 3 lictors per turn. There's a lot you can do with lictors, so these guys are okay, but I like them for their battlefield-wide spells. Their spells are mostly battlefield-wide. They can cast Unholy Power at only AoE 5, but it's the best you'll get unless you boost your, Prophet to one of these guys to get to level 4 for battlefield-wide. For the extra 7 death gems you're paying over the bishop, it's well worth it, because you can cast your Unholy Blessing battlefield-wide, which solves a lot of problems. You can cast a lot of spells way bigger. It makes you way more efficient, and that's really what you need with Ermor. Your mages. Spectator. This guy costs us 12 death gems and only gives us 9 research, which sucks, but he's a mage and he has fear of 7 and he's stealthy, and the stealth is very important for an ethereal troop. Stealth is very useful because you can't really be targeted by a lot of things like assassins and other things on the main battlefield. So stealthy mages are good, especially for transporting around gems, because it's nice having your battle mages also stealthy, so they can't be sniped out, instead of having to have a scout running around with a bunch of death gems. So you still need the scout running around with a bunch of death gems, specifically because you don't want to drop a guy with 20 gems on him into one combat and have him possibly die. But your scout could be another mage, one of your spectators sitting back and watching. So it's kind of nice. They have a niche. If you throw a Skull Mentor on them, they have a niche. They definitely fit what you need. But it's almost always better to save those 12 death gems to basically get a Dusk Elder for a little less than double. Because Dusk Elders are absolutely insane. And remember, when you're doing the math on these guys, remember you get 9 for 12. And I believe you can make a Skull Mentor for only 10. And you get 14 research for that, so just keep that in mind. It's better to have just a couple of these guys and throw Skull Mentors on them the odd turn that they're in a lab, and have them research. Dusk Elders are very versatile. They have 1 fire, 1 astral, 3 death, but then look at those cross paths. They have fire, air, water, earth, astral, death. And the best part is, since you have a guaranteed astral, what you can cast on yourself is Power of the Spheres to boost you +1 on any of your paths. So any 1 that you get, you now have a 2. So if you pull a water, now you've got fire 2, water 2, astral 2, death 4. It's very nice. It opens up a lot of spells. There are a whole bunch of spells you might not be thinking about, but they have fear of 8, cold aura, stealthy, higher cold, higher poison resistance, which makes them tough. They're ethereal. The downside is in Dominion 6 now, you can't be casting Iron Skin on yourself because you are spirit form. So that's a huge nerf to us because we don't have any protection if someone has a magic weapon now. That being said, these guys are monsters, and I wanted to kind of go over a couple of spells that you might not think about. These are not the basic spells that you're going to be casting. No, these are not your, cornbread cut and dry spells. These are just ones that you might not think about, and with these guys, you can get it. So Arcane Probing is a guaranteed astral search on thrones and things like that to get yourself a little more astral gem income. Something to think about. Body Ethereal. A lot of people think about that for, them, but they already have it. But casting it on your troops to buff troops, you can do that. If you have a whole bunch of Hellblessed Lictors and you cast Body Ethereal on them, that causes a lot of problems for people. Power of the Spheres, as I mentioned before, gives you a boost to everything. And when mages have 1/1/1/1 on their spells, that's really a good boost. It really helps out. Distill Gold, something you can do with I believe it's fire on these guys. It may not be efficient, but for Ermor, when you're really desperate for gold, you might need to. You can do Combustion versus Thugs. You can cast Phoenix Pyre for your own Thug. That's something that you can do combined with Soul Vortex for some disgusting shenanigans. You can summon a Behemoth, which is very important. If you haven't ever tried to summon giant undead elephants for Ermor, they have the one downside taken away from elephants of being afraid and trampling your own troops. Now that's undead, it's unthinking, it doesn't care. It just tramples on everything. You can reanimate archers, you can summon Banefire, you can drop Winds of Death, Clouds of Death. You can even cast Mist in a pinch with a gem to reduce enemy accuracy if they're bringing a ton of archers and mages. Remember, Dominions is about counterplay. And if you don't have answers for people's things that they're bringing, if someone shows up with 1,000 slingers with flaming arrows, you're in trouble. So, you got to think outside the box a little bit. You could do personal flight for your thugs. You can cloud trapeze on the rare A2 that you get. But one thing I see a lot of YouTubers recommend and guides recommend is to cast Stygian Rains on your troops with these guys. Do not do that. Absolutely do not cast Stygian Rain. That does not buff undead. Stygian Rain only buffs living troops. If you listen to anybody else making a guide that says cast Stygian Rains late game or use it or anything like that, do not do that. You will only be buffing the enemy and you'll have no idea why your enemy is suddenly so much tougher and your troops are not. It only buffs living troops. Rain's a spell they can cast if they pull a water random. That's great versus Fire Nations, which really helps for you. Fire Resistant Warriors helps your troops out. Summon Water Elementals if you need armor piercing attacks. Water Elementals are always like the untold secret of beating the hell out of thugs. They're hilarious. Voice of Tiamat, if you get underwater, you can grab yourself a whole bunch of gems. Summon Catablopus, something I don't see a lot of, but Catablopus are hilariously powerful. Rigor Mortis, you probably have already thought about, but you can cast it, even though it was nerfed in this by giving them a magic resist check. Leviathan, that's a phenomenal fear tank. These guys can summon them. Earth Grip, if you are facing thugs that have high defense against your troops and they're trying to ignore hundreds of long dead with maybe a fire shield to resist you, because now fire shield kills everybody. Earth Grip in them would help a lot with that. You can alchemically transmute with your earth and get more gold that way. You can summon poison golems. Fields of the Dead you can cast. Don't ever cast Eater of the Dead. I have done it twice in my entire career, and holy hell, it is terrible. He will always turn on you because your natural Dominion caused corpses. He will eat too much and he will turn on you. Don't ever make the mistake of casting Eater of the Dead. These guys are also good because you can get communions going with them, which makes them insanely deadly if you do that. If you're able to build slave items, like if you roll earth and you can build earth astral slave items and master items on these guys, you can really set up a disgusting communion, having guys running through a communion just with like maybe spectators in the communion and then a bunch of Dusk Elders running it or whatever. You can even run probably reverse communions, but if you can get those items built out, it's really, really good. Putrescator or Putrescator, however you want to do it. If you're a skater, you probably opt for the latter. But this guy is amazing. The reason for that is he busts out a Fire 2, Astral 3, and a Death 4 guaranteed. The nice thing about him is the fact that you can pull higher Banefire stuff than other people outside of combat. So when you're in combat, of course, you can always have your Dusk Elders cast power of the spheres to boost their level. But with this guy, you can cast higher level fire spells, forge fire items, more bane fire items require fire 2. You can build a lot with this guy, and it's actually really helpful to get this guy. So if you get this Fear 9 monster here, make sure you protect him. He's good. But now we're getting to the true hero, a Timo. I'm going to say it's a Timu. You can say it's Edemu. I don't care what you call him. He has Fear, Cold Aura, solid protection, good hit points. He has a helmet. He has a Bane Blade. He has a horse who does not care about anybody and has tons of hit points as well, with good stats and good magic resist on the horse as well. He attracts shades with his your Dominion. Everything's ethereal. Everything's tough. He's immortal. You can just run around just torturing people by running into their Dominion and beating the hell out of their provinces, thugging easily. This guy is a big key. You really need to learn how to abuse this guy for thugging. He takes until turn 15 minimum to show up, but then you get a bunch of shades to run around with, and he is just the greatest thug elf creature you could ask for. Now, he's not stealthy as a unit himself. Something you might want to consider. You could take a stealth bless, which I don't recommend whatsoever, and then bless him like that. But he is very useful and versatile to the point that I can't even go into everything he can do, because I'm pretty sure most of you are experienced enough to actually see what he can do, but he is very deadly. And even coming with a free Bane Blade that nobody gets if they kill him, it's great because you can now elf provinces and take over things pretty simply with a really powerful troop that if you make a mistake, he's immortal and pops back up at home. Don't do it when they're running around with Soul Slay if they're hunting for him, because they will. But he's very useful in that way. And I almost forgot to talk about this lady, the Wailing Lady. These summons, Revived Wailing Ladies, 8 gems for 1. Lamentations, 5 gems for 1. And Great Lamentations, only like 2.3 gems for 1. Once you get to the Great Lamentation is when you'll actually need them. They do an AoE 1, basically Soul Slay and Fear. It's amazing. Squeeze these girls with their 10 Fear in your troops. Mix them in everywhere you can. They are amazing. Put them in like 2nd or 3rd line and have them go in. The only downside of them, besides their obviously low protection, is the fact that if they're getting banished or hit with, dust to dust or something similar like that, Wither Bones, they're going to disappear so fast, and you're going to have spent so many gems to get them. But with their decent magic resist, if you have basic magic resistance spells going up every battle, they'll actually be pretty durable, and they'll do a lot of damage. They will cause a lot of hilarity in combat because they will just delete squares, and running around deleting squares is exactly what they're good at. Put them with a bunch of Triarius and they'll run around deleting squares while the Triarius just soak up all the damage. It's a beautiful thing to witness. Alright boys, and now we're going to be discussing magic. In general, I'm just showing you a couple examples here. I don't want to go over an exhaustive list of spells. That would be more for the advanced guide we eventually make. In general, these are a lot of spells you're going to be using. Some of them are rituals like Utterdark, Burden of Time, Foul Air, but many of them are combat spells. Early game, if you're getting rushed, for example, Shadow Bolt is a good spell to cast. Doesn't affect undead. Really good at hitting AoE 1 squares. Kind of like your version of Fireball, but with no friendly fire. A good thing for thugs later game is Invulnerability, Drain Life. Soul Vortex works really well. Winds of Death is a late game battlefield-wide spell. Is amazing. It's great. Decays a whole bunch of enemies. Summons, such as Legion of Whites, Tartarian Gate, Call Wraith Lord for another immortal like Etemu. Rigor Mortis in battle. Foul Vapors in battle. Those spells are pretty classic, but now Rigor Mortis allows them a difficult MR check to kind of negate it, so we are nerfed there again. Darkness is amazing. It's huge. It's -6 to anybody that's not demons, undead, or have Spirit Sight or Perfect Dark Vision. Black Death is a spell that I've used in multiplayer games. If I ever reach somebody's capital and they're defending it like a monster, I will just cast Black Death on them. I'll cast it repeatedly. I don't care. I have so many death gems that this waste of death gems is actually worth it to cripple people's income. I'll do it to multiple provinces. It depends how strong they are. If I can't really take them with battlefield tricks, I will do this. Not always works, but now understand you have poor research. So Skull Mentors and Owl Quills are going to be very important for you. If you have air gems, Owl Quills are a good way to spend them. So consider Skull Mentor and Owl Quilling every mage you have whenever they're sitting around, because your mages are going to be busy. But if you can throw this 20 boost to research to them on every time you're researching with them, it's a really big boost. It helps a lot. That's something to consider. Now, keep in mind, spells like Cloud of Death are good to use. They're powerful. Manifestation is a really good way to trick people with this Ashen Angel. This guy comes in and thumbs people to death. There are a lot of tricks you can use, but the number one key is you have to be tricky with Ermor. You have to be. If you don't understand the game of counters and counter plays and back and forth very well, and you don't have an answer for everyone's counter, they're going to cut through swaths of your undead with literally no problem. If somebody sets up a communion of banishment, you're going to die. Now, granted, priests alone are not great against our hordes. They're not. I have an image here that I'll pull up to show that they're not great against our hordes, as I tested it quite a bit. But when they communion up, it raises the relative level or the effective level of the priests banishing us, and then all of a sudden they start slaughtering everyone everywhere. So you really have to have answers for all this stuff. The reason I only brought up most of the death spells here is because a lot of these are good for you in generic situations. You're going to be using Rigor in pretty much every game you play, Foul Vapors in pretty much 80% of the games you play, Shadow Bolt early game in most of the games you play, late game Drain Life and Disintegrate, as well as Invulnerability, Soul Vortex. All these are tricks that you should have in your bag that you can pull out. But the problem is with Ermor, you're really going to be getting jumped by 3 or 4 people at a time, so you really need to just be flexible. Understand that your Dusk Elders are your key to everything, and you need to have enough of them on hand to make this stuff happen. Hell, you need to communion up if you need to. The key to magic battle is back and forth, trying to beat people by countering what they're doing. Don't just try to have an undead army that does the same thing every time, because I promise you somebody has crafted the perfect counter to that, and they're going to come crush you. Let's discuss our Pretender and how we can build our Pretender to counter both our poor research and enable us in certain magical paths and ways and forging items that'll help us out long term. Here it is, boys, our Pretender creation. One thing we're going to discuss with Pretenders is a few principles you want to stick to. First off, never take Dormant. Don't take Dormant, and sure as hell don't take Imprisoned. I don't care what anybody says. People say you can take Dormant to be greedy. Do not. Every single person in the game is going to try to kill you year 1, and you're going to need your Pretender to fight them off, period. If you don't have your Pretender year 1, you don't have the capability without Empowerment, which takes at least 5 turns, to summon your Archbishops and your Dusk Elders, and you're dead. You're dead year 2 because you don't have enough research, you don't have enough support, you don't have anything. Even if you're spamming Spectators as often as humanly possible in your province, you're not going to be able to survive without a bunch of Dusk Elders running around by year 2. So do not take Dormant. I don't care. If you for some reason want to play Dormant or Imprisoned, memorize the following message. Hey there, Ermor here. Wanted to reach out for a tentative nap offer, as frankly, I don't want to use my super combatant Pretender in your direction, as I feel we'd just both lose the game. I'll agree not to push my Dom your way with temples on the border, and you agree to avoid attacking me from your side, at least for now, and we'll both have a shot at winning this game. You know you can easily wipe me out mid-game if you need to, but early on I'd rather not waste my early game focus build on fighting you, and you won't get anything from any of my provinces, so we'd both lose. Why don't we just wait till mid-game, where you can easily wipe me out, and focus on that. If you say that to not one enemy, but every single neighbor you see, you've got a shot at survival with a Dormant Pretender, but it's very unlikely, because if they figure out you don't have a Pretender, they're going to stomp in and kill you. Instead, take an Awake Pretender to get your research snowballing. That means you need a Pretender with at least 3 death. This is an absolute necessity to get Dusk Elders going and similar things. I've tested Dominion free spawn, and for some reason, the amount of Dominion makes a fairly small difference in how many troops you get, and a small difference in how much money you get. Don't make a decision based on the money. It seems to be pure luck, but make a decision based on how much free spawn you want. If you don't have a ton of temples built by year 2, you lose, period. Temples seem to more than double the free spawn you get. They have the biggest effect on absolutely anything, but you want forts to protect your temples and to protect yourself and your gems and your gem sites. You really want forts and temples, but since you're going to be broke, you really want forts first. That's what you want. So in terms of having a high dominion versus a low dominion, doesn't really matter. Just remember that you're going to be crippling your death gem income. This is a really hard choice, because if you go with a high dominion, you're going to get a whole bunch more free spawn, but it's going to cost you money. But you're also going to have the capability of getting way more death gem income. That's kind of how I'm leaning. But if you go low dominion, trust me, you're not going to save your income. You think you will, but you won't, unless you change your order and productivity as well. You're not going to save your income. I know Lucid did it in Dominions 5 in his Pretender playthrough. Believe me, it doesn't work, or at least he mentioned it. It doesn't work anymore. I tested it. You'll see that in the testing video. Let's get down to chassis that we can discuss, and let's have a quick glance at them. Mother of Monsters seems obvious if you like Blood Vengeance, and you obviously need death, but here's the problem with her. Her monster summoning, they give you they have income. They charge you per month. They have a salary. So her little monsters that she's popping out, if you're not instantly throwing them into death, they're charging you money. The standard big monsters that she summons cost, I think it's 12 gold per year. So it's like a gold per turn. Not a lot, but if you let these things add up, you'll make yourself broke. So just make sure you spend them by killing them and running them into battle and getting your money's worth. Ferryman. This guy's fun. He's a Stygian guide, which is important late game for teleporting. Invulnerable, fear, cold resistant. Not much to look at, but he's got all right paths for you, but he's a little expensive for me. Prince of Death is hilariously expensive as well. He's got a reanimation bonus, but remember, this only works on these 3, the Soulless, Longduds, and Ghouls, which are already flooded with, so it's not nearly as good. That being said, he can fly. He's got Fear of 10, and he's kind of a behemoth in that way. Netter of the Moon up here is something to consider, specifically for the two reasons you can see right here. +1 magic, +1 luck. If you're going for a Netter of the Moon, you're legitimately going for like a luck strategy. That's the only reason you'd pick him. And the research. The Netter of the Moon, what the Netter of the Moon does, if Netter of the Moon had any death in here, like 2 Astral, 1 death, it would be the best chassis, period. Because it starts with a decent Dominion strength, good magic scale, good luck. So what you can do with this and Inspiring Researcher is you can get your magic up to +3, and then with Inspiring Researcher, if you stay in your home province, it's basically a +5. It solves the entire Ermor has terrible research problem. It really does. And then you can start spamming spectators as well, because having lower level mages doesn't hurt as bad. It's really, really viable, but it's tough to get the Netter of the Moon to work because of the magic paths and the cost to get into death, which you need. And frankly, I love Blood Vengeance to the point that it's probably unhealthy. So I edge away from this a little bit myself still. And early game, you really want a pretender that can fight. And the Netter with items can fight, but with these paths, it's really difficult to make yourself tough enough to fight off the stuff you're probably going to be facing. So tempting. One really powerful chassis that I've seen other people mention, but they did not catch the important part, is I've seen people talk about the Titan of the Crossroads, but the thing that I've seen other YouTubers miss, they just whiffed on this, is one of these Titans has a map move of 100 and can teleport around, and she can then summon the other 2 parts of the Trinity to herself. So you have 3 super combatants in the second year, which everybody knows, but out of those 3 super combatants, one of them heals disease. Like, I'll give you a good example if I had to quickly make her off the top of my head, because I'm trying to think of specific examples. If you had a 5 astral, 5 death, and say 3 nature, just to kind of capitalize on this, you would have 3 versions of her, right? One would be 3 astral, 4 death, and 1 nature with the hounds and the dual bane fires. They would be Stygian and Guide 75. They would have Fear of 5 and a patrol strength of 50. Right? That would be her. That would be the basic one that you would get. You would also get a 4 astral, 3 death, and 1 nature with a key to every entrance and the ability to teleport the other 2 forms to her. So she can teleport 100 squares every turn, and she can teleport the other 2 titans to her anytime she wants with an action. That's insane. And then the third one you'd get would be 3 astral, 3 death, 2 nature. They can craft level 2 nature items, which is important, and they're a disease healer, which is good since these guys are not undead. So it would help you out if you started to suffer from all your undead punishment that you were levying on the world with your globals and other things. Very notable stuff, very powerful. If you take this chassis, just make sure you take high enough death that you can cast your major summons year 1, so get this up to 3. The problem is, even if you get this up to 5, it splits into the separate chassis. I would go with a 4 or 5, test it out in a few test games to make sure you're getting at least death 3 on one of them, so you can summon your Dusk Elders and your Archbishops. Otherwise, you're really hurting yourself. Frankly, you only need to be able to summon the Dusk Elders, but you know what I mean. That being said, I love blood magic. I tend to go with Mother of Monsters, so let's craft ourselves a Mother of Monsters. Let's see what we can do. We know what we love down here, Blood Vengeance. We love that. I love it to the point that it's unhealthy, so ignore this if you want to win. But I also like, with Blood Vengeance, getting Reforming Flesh, but that requires 6 death, and it's really hard to afford. It used to be fairly decent to afford this, but I'll show you why it's not easily affordable anymore. Now we can get 3 Turmoil, because the Mother of Monsters gives us a boost to Turmoil. Thank goodness, because we got nerfed with these points. We can only go down 2 here, so we're losing points. Go to Cold, get that Death 4, get that Luck and that Magic, and now we have a couple extra points to put around. We could go high Dominion, or we could go higher Magic. There we go. That seems like a perfect little lineup. So we have exactly 0 points left. We have 2 Blessed points to play with. You could go with Strength of the Flesh, which makes them hit harder, especially your Knights of the Unholy Sepulchre. You could go with Strong Vitae or Resilient once or twice to get yourself a couple extra hit points on those guys. I would just be basic and go Undying twice. Gives your knights quite a bit more HP to play with. It'll at least get you a chance to reform, because instead of 6 HP on your knights, you'll have 10. They'll have a chance to reform before they get murdered by banishment. This is a very basic setup to play with, because now you're starting with the Mother of Monsters. She has 10 protection base, good 110 hit points. She pumps out a couple monsters in her Dominion. She has a Poison Cloud. She's pretty deadly. Now, she's cold-blooded, so you're going to suffer if you're in the cold. So you have to keep that in mind. I've seen a lot of people set up a Mother of Monsters with a cold Dominion and not pay attention to it. You could go hot Dominion, but I wouldn't. I would just treat her as a monster summoner. Just in case people attack you in your home province, you attack them. There are ways for you to prevent, especially with this. Get her a couple blood slaves, she can cast relief on herself and get rid of all the fatigue in combat. But you have to be really careful with her. Another option you could choose is the Titan of Crossroads, and instead of going for the Blood Vengeance route, go with Reforming Flesh, Let's see what we get. There we go. We can get that. We could get Magic 3, which is very important, but it would cost us another point. Go with Magic 2, deal with it, and have a couple more Undying points. Now, when you're looking at this total bless you could pump out Magic Resist. You could pump out Arcane Finesse. Arcane Finesse, believe it or not, gives you Magic Resist in a way. Now, hear me out. Your priests are going to be blessed. Your priests are also going to be casting your Unholy Protection, which gives you all extra Magic Resist. Sorry, Protection of the Sepulchre. You can see Protection of the Sepulchre Magic Resist negates easily, so it doesn't affect your troops that have higher magic resistance. If you give your priests +1 penetration, this will actually benefit them in buffing all of your troops. Plus, if you put the Sacred Armor on your mages, this will give them Arcane Finesse with all of their rigor spells and everything else. The name escapes me right now, what your, the sacred causing item, but if you put it on your Dusk Elders, then they become sacred as well, and you gain Arcane Finesse benefit there, and then you could throw yourself an Undying in here like this. Something like this would work very well with the Titan of the Crossroads, with the advantage being that your Bless isn't as strong, but the Titan can run around and absolutely annihilate people for you, and there's 3 of them. You're not dealing with 1, you're dealing with 3, and they have good magic paths. So that's something you'd consider. One thing that people have used in the past was the gray one, and then they would just twice spawn the gray one, but remember, gray one's not undead. You cannot twice spawn your pretender anymore, so don't make this mistake and choose the gray one or the crone. That was like the most classic, was the crone. You can't do it anymore because the crone will die of disease in a couple of years. Don't do it. You could perhaps do the Demi-Lich, crank out something like this. This would enable you to get a real Hell Bless, where you go maybe Blood Vengeance, Withering Weapons, or Reforming Flesh, depending on what direction you wanted to go. And then you could come in here and take Strength of the Flesh to get that 17 damage on your knights up to 19. You could do something like that. If you're facing high defense troops, you could take some attack skill in here. You could do all sorts of stuff for a Hell Bless. Reforming Flesh, forget that. You just want to go with attack skill, maybe 1 attack skill and Strength of the Earth, and then mix it in with Strength of the Flesh or Blood Surge instead of one of the Strength of the Earths. There you go. That would be an absolute Hell Bless for your Knights of the Unholy Sepulchre, and you'd be getting enough knights to just annihilate people with this extra +2 strength, +1 attack, so their damage is going up to from 17 to 19, and then your Blood Surge, you're going up to 22, and then you've got your Lance Charge on top of that, which is getting the double boost from the strength. This would make you a Hell Bless that would absolutely just wreck people in the first year. You could remove that and put in, say, Fire Resistance too, just to protect them from the early game counters. There's a lot of Hell Blesses that you could go through. A lot of these are fairly simple to set up, and since your Demi-Lich is your only summon for those Dusk Elders, get those Dusk Elders out and make sure you rush that research and rush your opponents. This is something that you would do if you really wanted to Hell Bless somebody and charge them with Lictors and try to just beat them to death and survive. There's also ways to do various resistances, shock resist, a little, lightning resist to make sure you're more resilient, but it's a tough thing to do with your Pretender because honestly, in Dominion 6, you have too many holes to cover up, so my thing is I like to go with Blood Vengeance to make everyone kill themselves and stick to simple chassis like the original Mother of Monsters one I pulled together. So try it out, let me know what's going on, and finally, what we're going to go over is just how to beat each and every counter and nation type that we might come up against. We're talking Fire Nations, we're talking Astral Nations, and we're even talking about other undead nations. Here are the tricks you can use in combat to beat all 3 of those types of nations. Alright, and here we have a battle where we were attacked by Abyssia, and they were doing a sort of communion setup with warlocks and anathemat dragons to try to banishment spam us, as well as hit us with Firestorm. I want to say a couple other battlefield wides, but Firestorm was the major one. But we countered that by casting Firefend. So let's check it out. Here we are, big wall of troops. We have our Velites up front, our Triarius behind. I think I messed that up. Legionnaires up front. But we have our Knights hidden over here. They're screened. We have elephants in the middle. We have a bunch of wild creatures, a few wights piled in with lictors spread out in sparse line formation. And we have our mages in the back. All of our Dusk Elders prepared. Cast Communion Master and then start dropping spells. So we'll watch what happens. Abyssia has a fairly basic Firestorm. We'll go slow the first couple turns and see what happens. Communions on both sides. Unholy Power. So you see we've already boosted the magic resistance of most of our troops. If you look around, there's quite a few that didn't get it, but quite a few that did. Our Undead is already blessed with Blood Vengeance, Regen, and Undying, and our Dusk Elders are starting to set up their communion. But the key we wanted to get out was Firefend. They got out Divine Blessing, casting Falling Fires here and there. Pretty devastating for the Undead that gets hit. But you're going to see here that banishment spam, even with communion setup, isn't really that strong. If you look, this guy has a sky metal matrix to become a master. He's got a master magic boost of 3, and he's a base priest level 3. So this banishment should be pretty heavy duty. There we go. That's the firestorm. Some of our guys are defaulting to horde of skeletons, which is irritating, but we'll see. And raise dead, which is just dumb. There's the banishment spam. There's our mist. We cast mist. I told you guys it can reduce accuracy of mages as well as archers. So mist is good. Limits precision of all spells and missiles, which we care about far less than they do. Then we cast rain to make sure we increase the amount of fatigue on fire spells. And we make sure, you know, most fires get put out. Unholy power spam. Get our guys a little faster, a little stronger. Some guys are not getting the magic resistance buff, but a lot of them are. That shrub is obviously not it. There we go. The Wailing Ladies with regen and Blood Vengeance. The Blood Vengeance does its work in this one. You'll see. You'll see as we just see people exploding. Blood Vengeance from Wailing Lady, 4 points of damage. Blood Vengeance, 7 points of damage. All this Blood Vengeance, all of it. Blood Vengeance from Knight, 6 points of damage. Blood Vengeance, 8 points. Blood Vengeance, 18 points. Blood Vengeance, 3. Blood Vengeance, 12. These guys are just deleting themselves. Blood Vengeance from Lictor, 14 points. Because of the smite. This is how you counter those priests. Blood Vengeance, 30 points. I'm telling you, Blood Vengeance is the way to go with these guys. Against Fire Nations is particularly effective. Fanaticism. We're getting crazy. We have a guy still spamming protection of the Unholy Sepulchre just in case we're getting banished spammed. Nether darts coming out, which don't hurt us. But the Blood Vengeance has already wiped up most of their mage core pretty quickly, which knocked out the firestorm, saved our troops a lot of life. And then you see the beauty here is these guys are getting stunned and damaged and everything else. We don't care about them. What we care about is we're protecting all of our banshees in here, and we're protecting all of our special troops running around like the basilisks and everybody else. I think there's a basilisk here spitting somewhere around here, but the elephants will trample. We're still doing plenty of damage, but these guys are not doing hardly any damage. They're just standing there getting beaten to death by both sides. We don't care. We protected them enough. Everyone's got fire resistance. And now if you look here, defeated the attacking force from Abyssia, found a metal matrix, but we killed most of their mages almost immediately. Most of their infantry, most of their lava warriors, this was a big loss for them. Archbishop, basilisks, behemoths, we lost 2 of our basilisks. And we did a whole bunch of damage with the knights, whole bunch of damage with the ladies, whole bunch of damage with the elders. But I think the majority of this damage that came to the lictors is not from them hitting people, it's from them blood vengeancing people. So try it out, drop a couple of those spells, see if you can't turn the fight on somebody with one of these nations. And again, here we are against an astral-based nation like Ind with lots of priests. We have a ton of these level 2 and mages with a lot of astral and earth. And then we have a ton of primate kings and prester kings. Level 4, whoa, prophet. Level 4, level 3, lots of spam. So I'm pretty sure they're just going to banish. This might go poorly for us. This is fire gems up front. A couple knights. We've got the big knights back here. We've got a bunch of Gog Reavers back here. Straightforward battle setup to show that banishment spam is not as effective as people think it is. There we go, got most of our buffs up. So we've got higher magic resist than normal here on most of our guys, and blood vengeance on everybody. So now, let's see how many of their commanders have taken damage already. Yep, we're getting there. Oh, there we go. Fatigued out now. Banishment spam. Look at that. Let's check which one of the commanders died from Blood Vengeance. There we go. Blood Vengeance. Blood Vengeance. Tracking Fire. Okay. Blood Vengeance. It's very effective. Even with a magic resistance of 14, base 15, which means they're resisting quite a bit of Blood Vengeance. But it always goes the way of the dead. Except this guy. What's his problem? You decaying? Weakened? Old? Relax, dude. Alright. Alright. Province previously owned by Ind has been conquered. No priest loss. That's good. No mage loss. Let's see how they did. 475 killed out of 555. Most of the mages sniped. And there you have it. Even with banishment spam from an astral nation, you don't need to worry. As long as you have Blood Vengeance and you have ways to spice things up just enough to surprise them a little bit. Alright, boys, and you know what they say. You see all over the forums, Scleria is going to dominate Ermor. Don't focus Ermor and ignore Scleria. Well, here's Scleria on the left. More undead than us. Running around with all these loaded lines, lictors living, bunch of Triarius living. Pfft. Cowards. Whites, ghosts even. I don't know what these guys are doing back here. They came to party. All these mages are like jammed in the middle. Why do they not have any gems? Are they communion slaves? Where are their gem guys? Oh wait, those are ours. Grand Thaumaturge. There's one. Oh, there's another. Wait. Oh, there was one. They seem to be carrying all the gems on very few people. We're gonna see what happens here. They have to do communion. Pretty sure they do. Yep. Oh, you idiot. You didn't fly to the back. Well, wouldn't have mattered. But Rigor. Alright, we got Darkness. We got Rigor up. This is where we normally win. But they have a bunch of undead, so... These sounds are hilarious. Oh, Solar Brilliance. Oh, that bastard. That barely hurt any of my troops, right? My guys get blinded? No. 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 Ha-ha! Easy MR negates. Yeah, good luck on that one. Oh, you hear those sounds? That's the sound of Blood Vengeance kicking in. I can hear it. Yep. See what happened? Oh, Frost Cloud. There it is. Blood Vengeance hit him. Yep. Let's see the other one. Where's your Blood Vengeance? Where is it? Blood Vengeance. Gotcha. There we go. That Blood Vengeance coming through, boys. For certain nations, Blood Vengeance is so hard to deal with. Light of the Northern Star. Man, this guy is... Everybody's off script now. What are they spamming back here? Unholy Power? Wither Bones? Wither Bones. Isn't that ironic? Yeah. Let's go. Start spamming the hordes. Just to send a message. What are we fighting over here? What the heck are we hitting? What do they have that's still alive? Treated, dead, Mound King, Spectator. Oh wait, that's ours. I don't think they have any commanders left. I think they have... Oops, now he's dead. Oh, there we go. Sensor. Did they turn him on me? Sensor resisted a bunch of effects. Hit Triarius. No, he's still fighting them. He got the last kill. Alright, go team. Alright, and as you can see now, defeated the attacking force from Scleria. They brought plenty. Centurion, Grand Thaumaturgs. Oh, Scythe Wielder. What is this guy? There we go. Now, see, that's the key to us, is those Dusk Elders. Survival. You see that? That's the key. There you go, boys. Get out there and dominate the world with your undead hordes.